Welcome to Literary Latte, the podcast with a Southern accent on writing. I'm Lynda Bouchard, and it's time for your jolt of literary inspiration. My guest today is Bren McClain, whose award-winning debut novel, titled One Good Mama Bone, draws on her family's rich Southern heritage. It's about the mysterious, powerful bonds of family and the eternal longing for home. Bren finds the universal in a very specific story about two mothers, one human, one animal, who are equally committed to their offspring. Bren McClain joins me today to talk about her unique journey to publication, the way meeting Pat Conroy changed her life, and much more. After this from our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Macintosh Bookshop and the Beaufort Bookstore, two of the best independent bookstores in the South, located in Beaufort, South Carolina. They carry books from the Civil War era, popular fiction, and everything Southern. And they carry all of the titles by guests on this show. So be sure to stop by both locations the next time you're in Beaufort, South Carolina. Now on to the show. Joining me from Nashville, Tennessee is award-winning author Bren McClain. Her debut novel, titled One Good Mama Bone, captures the rich heritage of her Southern roots. Bren was born and raised in Anderson, South Carolina, on a beef cattle and grain farm, and she draws deeply from the well of her childhood memories as she sculpts the story of love, loss, and unexpected redemption. It's a story that has lingered with me, one that explores the strengths and limitations of parental love and the healing power of the human-animal bond. Bren is a two-time winner of the South Carolina Fiction Project, and One Good Mama Bone won the 2017 Willie Morris Award for Southern Fiction and the Patricia Wynne Award for Southern Literature. It received praise from Pulitzer Prize-winning author Robert Olin Butler, among other distinguished writers. And the New York Times bestselling author Mary Alice Monroe provides the foreword to the book. Today, we'll dive into Bren's journey to publication. We'll talk about the serendipity of meeting Pat Conroy and the way her Southern heritage informs her writing, and much more. Bren, I have been looking forward to this. Welcome, my friend.
Oh, Lynda, thank you so much, as I have been looking forward to. And thank you for that awesome introduction. May I have a copy of that? No, it's beautifully done. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. And congratulations on the success of this book, One Good Mama Bone. This was a story that has lingered with me. It's just beautifully written, and it was published in 2017 and is still going strong. And that's a testimony to the strength of your writing. And that extends to the bio on your website. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind reading that for us.
I got set for life at the age of 3. My two loves, animals and writing, were born. My daddy tells me I can't possibly remember, but I do. The pickup truck had wooden railings around the back. It came around the side of our house. I was standing by our kitchen table, watching out the window. He says someone must have told me these details, but no one had to, because of what stood in the back of that truck, inside those railings. It was our milk cow. I called her Mama Red, and she was leaving. I was 3 years old, and I loved her. I'll cover a lot of ground here fast. I wrote 2 failed novels, got a literary agent, lost a literary agent. But when I returned to what was set in motion in a 3-year-old Anderson, South Carolina farm girl, writing and animals, my literary career changed, and my novel, One Good Mama Bone, was born. I even went so far as to write about a mama cow. I named her Mama Red, and I love her. Writer Albert Camus has written, "A man's work is nothing but this slow trek to rediscover, through the detours of art, those 2 or 3 great and simple images in whose presence his heart first opened." My heart first opened with that milk cow. I've heard it said, write what you know. Others say, write what you want to know. I say, write what opens your heart, because you remember. You do.
That is just so beautiful. And thank you for reading it. Writers out there, take note. That is a beautifully crafted bio. Let's get to the book now. And just fell in love with Sarah Kramer, the main character, who at an early age was told by her emotionally abusive mother that she didn't have, quote, one good mama bone in her. But despite the years of heartache and heart-wrenching events, after witnessing a mama cow's love for her calf, she learns what unconditional love is, and Sarah proves her mother wrong. So, Bren, it's my philosophy that the stories we tell not only come out of the world that we live in, but they also help us create the world we want to live in. Talk about that as it relates to this book.
Yeah, goodness, you've kind of choked me up, Lynda. You know, this book has been in the marketplace for 2.5 years. I wrote it a long time before that. And Sarah Kramer, you said you fell in love with her. I did too, and I'm still in love with her. She represents everything that's good about us. She's who I want to be when I grow up. I got an email from a reader not too long ago who said that Sarah Kramer makes me want to be better than I am. And I think that just really sums it up for me too. You know, as a writer, you have to put characters in circumstances to see what they're capable of. When you keep your characters too safe, they stay safe. And so unless I put the screws to Sarah Kramer, she never would have known what she was capable of, and to be able to live in this world that she wanted, to give herself this new narrative versus the one that her mother loaded her with that you cited when she was 6 years old, Lynda.
Right. And I love that phrase, keeping your characters safe, or, not keeping them safe.
Right. Yeah, you have to really put the screws to them to see what they're capable of. And that's where the beauty comes. That's where the glory comes. That's where that growth comes in a character. And we watch Sarah Kramer go from a really still kind of repressed little girl who still believed what her mother told her, to really giving herself a new way of thinking about herself. And there's a lot of power in that.
Yes, there is. So tell me how this story came to you.
Yeah. Well, I must say that One Good Mama Bone is the 3rd novel I've written, but the first to be published. Actually, it's what became of a failed 2nd novel, Lynda. And that novel, the germ, the little seed of that came to me a long time ago. It was in June of 1993 when I lived in Atlanta. A next door neighbor of mine called me over and said, "Bren, can you come talk to me?" And because I've got good manners, Southern manners, I went over, although I really didn't know him. We'd never had a conversation. I knew his name was Ron. He had a great suntan and he drove a white convertible Cadillac. But I went to sit on his porch, Lynda, this late afternoon, and he looks at me and says, "Bren, I turned 60 years old today." I said, "Happy birthday, Ron." He says, "I only tell you that because I've been carrying around a secret for 54 years. 6 years old, little boy growing up outside of Birmingham. My mom got me up in the middle of the night, made me come to the kitchen where I witnessed something and participated in something. And she told me I could never talk of it. Keep it a secret. And he said, Bren, I've kept it a secret for 54 years, but I can't keep it a secret any longer. And I'm choosing you to tell, knowing you're a writer. And Lynda, through tears and a shaking body, he told me about this one night that shaped him for the rest of his life. He went through it in painstaking detail, and I sat there squeezing this white wicker chair, and we all know what sound that wicker makes. That's what I was doing. I never asked him any questions. I didn't say, did your mother mean it? And this involved the birth of a baby, by the way. What were you thinking? Blah, blah, blah. I was paralyzed. I couldn't say a word. When he finished, I simply got up and gave him a hug and I said, I'm so sorry, Ron. And when I walked back to where I was living, I told myself, Bren, you're being given this story. You're being chosen for this story. Now, go over there and make some notes so you won't forget. But my gosh, Lynda, I could never forget what he said. And I could not commit to paper and pencil what he had told me. It was too horrible. It was monstrous. So I went about my life. And that was the time I was writing the very first novel, which I wrote and was working on. And then in June of 1999, I'm going to pick up the needle and move it 6 years now. I'm getting ready to wanting to work on another story, another novel. And I'm in Assisi, Italy with Dorothy Allison, a mentor, kind of hero idol of mine. And she assigned us that very first day to go and write something about motherhood. Now, she was more articulate than that, but nonetheless, write something about motherhood. And Lynda, I remembered panicking, going, I'm not a mother. What am I going to say? I don't know anything about motherhood. What am I doing? And I fretted and I fretted. I went back to my little bitty villa apartment, opened up the window. There was no air conditioning there. And all of a sudden, the voice of little 6-year-old Ron began to talk to me and tell me really verbatim as Ron had. So I wrote that, went to class the next morning and read it out loud. And Dorothy Allison basically came over and kicked me in the butt and said, get out of here, McClain. And I thought, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? I spent all this money. I must not really be a writer. She said, no, you go and you write that sucker. So what happened was I went and wrote it. It took me 4 years. It became a story that honored mothers. In the process of writing this book, that book, I called it Willie June. My own mother died, and she was my very best friend, and I took a hit. The mother's name was Sarah Creamer. And she was a monster in that book, exactly as Ron had told me. The little boy I named Emerson Bridge. But I got to tell you something. The book did not work. It was a failed novel. It happens. My two readers that I trust implicitly said, Bren, no, nobody will read this book. That woman is a monster. And they were talking about Sarah Creamer. I said, oh, no, I love her. And they said what no writer wants to hear. That is, Bren, whatever you feel for Sarah Creamer is not on the page. And Lynda, I didn't know what to do to fix it. So I put it up. We got busy about life, and my next novel chose me, actually the one I'm writing right now. And then, now we're getting over to Mama Bone. And then on November 5th, 2008, I'm visiting my daddy on the family farm in Anderson. It's on a Sunday. It's in the midst of a weaning when you separate the mama cows from the babies. And if anybody who's listening has ever heard what that sounds like, you'll never forget it. It's guttural. It's mournful, primal. It sounds like this. Oh! It's a standard farming practice because the farmers are hoping that the mama cows are pregnant. So anyway, I go to bed that night. The mamas are calling for the babies for the mamas. Those sounds woke me up about 5 a.m. And what's interesting to me is I grew up on that farm, which means I was exposed to those sounds for 18 years. but I never heard them until I heard them in 2008. I get dressed, I go out in the pasture, I see huddled at this corner fence these mama cows calling for their babies, 30 yards up the grassy lane, the babies huddled, calling for the mamas, this back and forth, back and forth. Those sounds sent an electric chill through my body, a current. I'd never experienced a sensation like this. And I, Lynda, knew in front of me was the missing piece of the story about mothers that I had been wanting to tell all this time. So what did I do? Out with the old, bye-bye. I don't care if it took me, years to write the Willie Jean story. It didn't work, but that's what it took to get me to this point. There was a cow in the deep corner whose eyes were cut at me. I felt pleading to bring her baby back. I walked over to her and I said, sweetheart, no, it still gets me. I can't bring your baby back, but I can tell your story. And I knew then I had the centerpiece for the next book about mothers that I wanted to tell. And I knew that this one I was going to get right. And that's how I began and how Mama Bone came into being.
That is just amazing. And it talks to, Bren, that painful and mysterious process of how sometimes the stories come to us and are just given to us. And it was someone else's story to begin with. It became your story, and now it's our story. It's a testimony because it's still resonating with your readers. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
I read in an interview in which you were asked why you wrote about cows.
What did I say?
Why? So why a cow? You kind of did explain that, but even though that happened, you could have made it a horse, you could have made it some other. So why did you keep it that cow?
You know what? You're in my psyche. You're touching on something that I'm not really proud of, but it's instructive, not just for me as a writer, but for me as a human being. I think you can't separate being a writer and being a human being. What I learned about being human has to do with writing and then back and forth. But I had moments, I must confess this. I had moments in the writing of Mama Bone, One Good Mama Bone, that I would think my lower self, kind of got a hold of me and whispered these kind of detrimental words. And those words were, Bren, really? A cow? Bren, who's going to want to read about a cow? A cow. What about, you mentioned a horse, Lynda. I entertain those. What about horse? Can you switch it over to a horse? Because people love horses. I wouldn't think they're quite as adorable as a dog. And I mean, that would be primo if I were to switch over to a dog. But I entertained those moments of self-doubt, but I would squash them every time. And I remembered the last time it rose up and when I squashed it and I renewed my dedication. And actually, I should use the word promise, because I made a promise to Mama Red, that cow in the deep corner, that I would tell her story. Remember that? That's a promise. And you don't go back on that promise. And so I never turned down that corner again. And I got to tell you, Lynda, what entertained a little bit, squashing, that is making the cow a horse or something, ultimately is what has turned out, I think, to be the biggest gift of the book. Readers' responses to Mama Red in my novel are unparalleled of any. I mean, people love Sarah Creamer too, my main character. But listen, it's the connection with Mama Red. People have given me original paintings of Mama Red when I would go to a bookstore. When I went down to Lemuria Books in Jackson, Mississippi, a friend of mine had commissioned a local artist to do an original painting of Mama Red. Come on. It's amazing. I got an email from a reader in Boston, and which I love because, it's outside the South. And she said, "You don't know me, and I'm writing to you through tears. I looked you up. I went on your website and I got your email address. But listen," she says in this email, I must come and meet Mama Red. And we should tell listeners at this point that Mama Red is a real cow living on my daddy's land, that actually my father was going to send her to the cattle sale not too long after this experience that I've been telling you about with her. And I actually bought Mama Red from my daddy for $1,000 and gave her sanctuary. And she can live out her days. She is still alive today, and she's 28 years old, living on the farm in Anderson. So I needed to insert that. But this reader then contacts me and says, "Bren, I just feel, I read the end of your book and I read your acknowledgments that Mama Red is a real cow living on the family farm. I know you don't know me, but is there any way I can come and meet her?" This was a reader in Boston. So I said, "Absolutely, of course." And it turns out that she is a photographer only of cows. And then she goes back and she makes those photographs into paintings. She spent 2 days photographing Mama Red and just getting really comfortable with her, and then went back to Boston and did an original painting. You see what I'm saying? It's the connection with the cow, and what a lesson. And again, it's not just about writing, it's about life. What you're called to do, what chooses you, I think we need to honor.
Yeah, there's a payoff for staying true to your dream, which you did. And so where does that painting hang? Is it in your house?
I need an entire room because it's not just paintings. It's coffee mugs that people have given me. People have stitched Mama Red little napkins. I mean, it would blow your mind what people have done for Mama Red and the connection with the cow. I've had people who've gone vegan, for example, who said, "I will never touch red meat again." And so it's been glorious. Recently, a book club outside of Atlanta, these gals kept saying, "Bren, we've got to come see Mama Red, Mama Red." And so, you know what? I met them over there one day, and they, made pictures I'll never forget. They were city girls, Lynda. And one of them came out to the pasture in these very fashionable white pants and, little white boots and stuff, to come out to the farm. But it's been it's been amazing.
Let's go back to the start of your writing career. And in the foreword to the book, Mary Alice Monroe talks about what you might call a serendipitous meeting with Pat Conroy.
Oh, yeah.
At one of his famously long book signing events.
Yeah. Yes.
And so can you talk a little bit about what that meeting was like and what it ultimately came to mean for you?
Right. Well, let me just put a circle in listeners' minds right now. All right. It's a circle. So in July of 95, I was in one of those long lines, and this was beach music for Pat. And I had just kind of begun writing a lot. I was still writing that first novel, and I considered myself a baby writer. But anyway, I get up to him and you give him the book, and he starts to sign it. And I leaned over the table and I said, "Mr. Conroy, I'm writing a novel too." And he stops writing. He looks up at me and he goes, "Oh, tell me about it." And so I did. And he honestly took out pencil and paper and wrote his agent's name, address, telephone number down and said, "Hey, when you finish, contact him and say Pat Conroy sent you." So he did that for me. And then he wrote in my novel for Bren McClain, whose novel I hope I get to read one day. Okay, now we're gonna fast forward many years. So Pat Conroy formed his own imprint under the University of South Carolina Press called Story River Books. This was 2013. And so Pat became my publisher. It kind of wound. I knew when I sent my manuscript in to Jonathan Haupt at USC Press that Pat was going to publish it. It took a year, but I got the contract and all of that. So 20 years now after this 95, we're in 2015, and I just gotten that contract with Pat. I'm in Beaufort, South Carolina at his 70th birthday party in another line, and I get up to him with another book for him to sign of his. And, he's signing, and I lean over this time and I say, Mr. Conroy, I want to thank you for publishing me. And he stops, and looks up at me, and he goes, because he had my name, Bren, on one of those little Post-it notes. He said, what's your last name? And I said, McClain. And he goes, what's the name of your book? And I said, One Good Mama Bone. And he goes, the cow, and I mean, I was already crying, Lynda, but we're talking ugly tears now, ugly. And then in that book, he wrote for Bren McClain, the marvelous writer who now is part of Story River Books history. Can you believe that circle?
It's just amazing. And it shows you the serendipity involved in publishing. But that is like a dream come true for every writer. And, Pat was so generous. He was always so generous with writers. I mean, I don't think I've seen any other author that was so giving and supportive. And, you were so lucky to be part of that imprint.
I was so lucky, and there was a certain window that we all had, as you know. Nobody knew it back then that Pat wouldn't live, past March of 2016. He was, 5 months away when I thanked him. We never know when we turn the corner what's next. But yes, serendipity. And it was, I feel as though it was ordained and destined. And I also feel as though I have ridden on Pat Conroy's enormous, generous heart in the publishing of this book. And I think it's one of the big reasons why this book has been received the way it has.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on now?
Sure. So this one is inspired by a real woman, a woman who lived in South Carolina, a woman named Eula Bates, who lived down near North Augusta, Aiken, that area of South Carolina. In 1951, August 27th, 1951, Eula, who was 54 at the time, got outside of her farmhouse with her brother George with shotguns that they held on a bulldozer that was about to come through their 30-acre farm and build a 4-lane blacktop into the Savannah River hydrogen bomb plant. For listeners who know, this was the largest use of eminent domain in a time of peace. In 1950, the government announced that 6,000 people were going to be thrown off their land. The government took 250,000 acres by eminent domain. The government didn't need Eula's entire farm. Like, they just need to run a road through it. And Eula said no. They condemned her property. And when she held a shotgun out there, they sent the cops. And people might think, hey, what they do? Haul her off to jail or what? I said, no. They hauled her to the state mental asylum on Bull Street in Columbia, South Carolina. Committed her, declared her and George mentally incompetent, and kept them for 16 years. So I'm writing a novel, Lynda, that's inspired by Eula Bates. The reason it's fiction is I'm picking her up at age 80, near the end of her life, and rewriting the end of her life. Because what really happened to her, it just kind of one bad thing kept happening. And I'm going to give Eula Bates, I'm going to give her justice. She's going to see justice in her lifetime now.
So in closing, Bren, what do you hope your readers will take away from your novel, One Good Mama Bone?
I used to think a lot about, that they would know this or understand this, all those kind of verbs. I not anymore. No, I don't. I want readers to feel That's the verb. I don't want you to know or understand. I want you to feel something. That's what I want. And I don't really care what that is. I'm not dictating the emotion, but I want you to feel something. I've got these words above me in my writing room, 3 big words. And yes, I do write on my walls. Wake us up. And that's what I like to do as a writer, is I want to wake people up. And I think part of that is feeling. So I want people to feel. I want you to feel something.
Well, I sure know I did. And wow, you took a cue from William Faulkner. You write on your walls too.
Yes, I do. I
love that.
And there's a YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, and it's, you people can go out and look at it. But oh yeah, I write on my walls.
Well, my guest today has been Bren McClain. Her novel, One Good Mama Bone, is published by the University of South Carolina Press and is available at your favorite booksellers. You'll find a link to Bren's book on Amazon in the show notes, and I'll also have a link to her website in the show notes where you can find out more about Bren and her work. Bren, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you for being my guest today and for writing One Good Mama Bone.
Listen, thank you for inviting me to be a guest on your show and for reading One Good Mama Bone and talking so kindly of it. So thank you so much, Lynda.
If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your tribe and be sure to go to Apple Podcasts to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. Join me next time for another Southern-laced literary conversation.
You've been listening to Literary Latte with Lynda Bouchard. For more information, visit bookingauthorsinc.com.